Yeah, g'day YouTubers. Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about the different chain profiles that are out there. But before we do that, we've got to go back, way back in time, way back. Back to the early 50s. And that's going back quite a long time, when Joseph Burford Cox invented the chipper chain and put a worldwide patent on it. They still sell chipper chains today, mainly for harvester. You can get 1/2 inch or 3/4 chain for wood harvesting machines. And the chipper chain is sold in a few variants by a few companies. It's not as popular as the standard semi-chisel. Standard semi-chisel, which is the first one that we've got here, would be the most popular worldwide. Reason being is the working corner has a nice radius edge on it. It's this radius edge that helps the durability and the sharpening between being blunt and dull is a lot longer than full chisel. So typically we have a top plate angle here of about 30 degrees and a top plate cutting angle of 60 degrees. And if you have a circular file, which is held about 20% above, it's right in this corner section here that you end up with about 60-degree angle with a file, which is the optimal angle. So that's the semi-chisel. There's a few variants of semi-chisel as well. But before we sort of get into that area, we'll talk about the full chisel. Now, the full chisel, the shape looks exactly the same, except we end up with a square shoulder at a right angle, and we end up with a very sharp point. This actually is much more aggressive and cuts the timber much better. Problem is, it comes to a very sharp point, and it's this sharp point that gets dull a lot quicker. Now, the variant that I was talking about is a chamfer chisel. And what that virtually is, rather than have a radius like that, it just has a 45-degree angle. And that chamfer can vary in size. So it can have a small edge, a medium edge. I don't think there's a huge deal of difference between it. It's just, somebody's come up and will say, hey, I've got a chamfer chisel, it works better. So I've never seen one. They're not commonplace, but they do sell them. Okay, so the next thing that we've got after that is a few variants, especially in still, with their hexa, Husqvarna with their X-cut. So these two are variants of the full chisel. And it's got a narrower kerf. Narrower kerf simply means that the widest point of the tooth when it's brand new on a full chisel 3/8 chain is 4.5 millimeters. When you reduce the width of the chain, that's referred to narrow kerf. So hexa has 4.1 millimeters in width rather than, and because it's reduced by about 10%, it actually cuts faster. So yeah, it's notably different, and it typically looks like that. It's hexagonal. That's your 60 degrees in, your 60 degrees down, 60 degrees on the bottom. So that's half of your hexagonal built into the tooth. It really does work well. And also the other thing is, what I've noticed is that this long edge here works and digs into the timber much better than what a curved edge does. This curved edge here, this C shape. So the hexa really does perform really well. It was developed for forestry workers. And if we look at the semi-chisel being the slowest to cut through timber, by 10% slower than full chisel. So if full chisel is 10% faster, probably hexa is going to be about another 10% on top of that, making it extremely, the difference between hexa and semi-chisel is about 20%. This is 20% slower than hexa. So therefore, this is 10% faster than standard full chisel, approximately, give or take a few percent. So the next most aggressive is the square ground, which almost has 90-degree side plate. You'll notice that the side plate is something that maybe some people don't talk about. As I just spoke before, the top plate cutting angle is this angle on the working corner. This little corner here does all the work. Probably 90% of the cutting is all done by this little working corner. And a chainsaw tooth works a little bit like a chisel. When it comes around on the top of the chain and comes around the nose bar and it's ready to dig into the wood, it hits the wood, digs in, pulls forward like that, but it can't dig anymore because the raker limits the amount that it can dig in and then straightens up again. So it has this little rocking motion like this. And that's the way it works. And there's a video I've got on the channel that you can see, a high-speed video about how a chain works. So when we talk about the square ground has this beveled corner on here is fairly aggressive, the top plate and the side plate. And it really digs in well. So when we talk about the side plate, hexa has a 60-degree side plate angle going in and 60-degree angle going down on the side plate. So you've got two angles on the side plate, 60 in, 60 down. Whereas you look at a normal side plate on a full chisel, it's got a C shape. It's referred to the C shape. And the same as semi-chisel, you've got that C shape. And exactly the same thing when we're talking about the working corner, it's only this area, which is probably 10% of that point, is doing 90% of the work. So they're your different chains. And as I've mentioned, you've got the narrow kerf in the different profile, like X-cut and hexa. So that's where we are with the type of different chains that we've got. 90% of people will use this type of chain, the semi-chisel. Semi-chisel is much more forgiving if it ever hits a little bit of dirt, or just say you're cutting a log, it's got termites in it or something, because you've got to blunten the whole corner. So there's much more area. If you look at the surface area, that's the sharp surface area on this tooth. Whereas the point, there's not much of area on that point, very, very little. So that's why this one goes blunt much, much quicker. But having said that, let me say this, that with the hexa actually stays sharper longer than standard full chisel. But the semi-chisel will stay sharper longer than Still's hexa. But hexa has got a worldwide patent on it, and it was developed for the forestry industry. So whether you like it or not, it is a great chain. Now, I'll use any chain, I'll try any chain that's out there. And I've found out that hexa is superior and more practical and easy to grind. It doesn't get much easier to grind something like that. That is really easy to profile. So much so that, I'll just show you on my grinder. It's pretty straightforward. So we'll have a look at that. So we come around here, and we'll just zoom in there. And you can see the hexa profile quite easily. And it's pretty straightforward because we use this edge of the grinding wheel that comes down on the side plate. Roughly 2/3 of the way down, and then we intersect, and this part of the grinding wheel goes down the part. We'll see whether we can put it up here and you can see it better. So if this is the tooth, it's like that. Fairly unique, and that fits it over like that. So it's pretty simple to grind that profile using your dressing block. All you've got to do is get that angle right. So the next thing, just to briefly sort of talk about, is that the angles that you use when filing. Now typically, as I spoke before, this top plate angle here on semi-chisel is 30 degrees, and on full chisel it's about 25 degrees. You can use 30 degrees on full chisel, typically on softer wood. So the only other angle that you can change is this top plate cutting angle on the grinder. Very, very difficult to change using a file. If you file too low down, you'll end up with too much hook. And if you've got too much hook on it, you need the metal underneath. As you can see, it's quite thick in the corner to support the point. So all this metal, the thickness of the top plate is thick enough that it can support this tooth without being bent over. So still have their top plate and this side plate thickness is stamped out of material, approximately 1.5 millimeters in thickness. Some of the other chainsaw manufacturers are only stamping out of material that's only 1.2 mil wide, so still has fairly thick chain made out of thicker material, and that gives you great support. So that's probably about it. It's just a bit of a tutorial about the different types of chains that are out there. And the other thing is green timber. You can go with much more aggressive angles with green timber. When you've got really hard timber, you've got to back off of those aggressive angles, because you'll find out it'll blunt much, much quicker. Hexa, to me, so far has shown that it is probably one of the best chainsaw type profiles that's came out in quite a while. So much so that they've got a worldwide patent on it. Now, that's pretty remarkable in itself, because considering Joseph Cox put a worldwide patent on his Cox chipper chain, so he invented the semi-chisel. Ray Carlton invented the full chisel. Took him quite a while to get his patent through. He had quite a lot of knockbacks, but in the end, he got it through. So Ray Carlton invented the full chisel chain in the early 60s. So yeah, and then still, and as far to my knowledge, I haven't heard of any other patents from the 60s. You got the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000, 2010s, 20s, and then all of a sudden still put a worldwide patent on hexa. So that is a long time between the 60s, and here we are in 2024, and we're only talking going back a few years ago that we had a worldwide patent on the hexa. So that in itself should tell you that if you're thinking of getting another different type of chain, get a hexa. You can get a hexagonal file, but I find it much easier that if you do use a grinder, it's so easy to dress the grinding wheel. And I've got videos on here that sort of go into that, how to do that. So it's pretty straightforward. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye for now.